Fear is a natural emotion that occurs as a reaction to threat or danger. It can protect us from danger by helping us to remain alert and cautious. However, fear can also be negative if it becomes unnecessary. In this clip, you will see how Sergey did not follow the instructions of his superiors and went out into the street. But then this happened. Welcome to Wild Assault. Sergey was a fisherman's watchman who was engaged in guarding and maintaining the fishing camp. He monitored the water body, checked the nets, and participated in catching fish. Sergey was born and grew up in Smirnikovsky district, where he became interested in fishing as a child. He skillfully handled fishing equipment, knew the peculiarities of fish behavior, and was an experienced fisherman. At work, he was a responsible and punctual employee who always performed his duties with proper quality. His knowledge and experience were valuable to the team, and his help was always useful in solving difficult tasks. Bear sightings are not uncommon in Smirnikovsky district. After all, these are animals that live in forests and mountains. Their territory often overlaps with the territory of people. In such cases, it is very important to know how to behave properly to avoid conflicts and to protect both yourself and the animal. Maybe, as an experienced fisherman and watchman, Sergey had experience of meetings with bears and knew how to behave in such situations. Sergey went out for a walk around the fishing camp as usual with a pack of cigarettes and a lighter in his pocket. After walking about 100 meters from the booth, he took out a lighter, but suddenly it fell out of his hands. Sergey stooped down to pick it up, and at that moment he saw a bear running in the distance. Sergey's spirit was seized and he instantly jumped up from the ground, rushing towards the booth. The bear started to catch up with him, and at the same moment, Sergey heard a loud growl behind his back. He realized that the bear was getting closer and closer, and his heart raced with fear. Sergey ran to the booth and opened the door with a jerk. He managed to enter, and as he was already slamming the door behind him, he heard the bear crashing into it with all his might. The beast began scratching at the door and growling, trying to get inside. Sergey pressed himself against the wall, clutching a lighter in his hand. His heart was pounding frantically and his ears filled with the bear's menacing growl. He realized that he was in danger and prayed that the bear would not be able to break through the door and break in. Despite his fear and panic, Sergey kept his cool. He realized that his own life depended on his actions. And at that moment, he realized how important it was to know how to behave properly in case of an encounter with a wild animal. After a few minutes, the bear stopped scratching at the door and, after making a few more growling sounds, stepped aside. Sergey stood against the wall for a long time, listening to the bear moving away, and only when he was sure that the danger was over did he slowly release his breath. Sergey and his superiors gathered in the office after the incident with the bear. Everyone was shocked by what had happened and discussed how they had managed to avoid disaster. The superiors expressed their gratitude to Sergey for his coolness and courage in a difficult situation. After this incident, it was decided to increase security at the fishing camp. 2 officers were now on shift to be more prepared for possible dangers. They were also given a full set of special equipment to ensure their safety. Sergey was put in charge of a young trainee named Dimitri. Dimitri was clumsy and slow, and it was not easy for him to master all aspects of the work of a fish guard. But Sergey never gave up hope and tried to teach Dimitri everything he knew. He gave him training on net checking, explained the peculiarities of fish behavior, and shared his experience of encounters with wild animals. Sergey was patient and friendly. He tried to support his young colleague and inspire him to work hard. Dimitri was slowly but surely learning and getting better every day. Sergey saw his efforts bear fruit and was proud of his student, but unfortunately the training ended in one day. In the morning, Sergey woke up with a feeling of unknown anxiety. He sensed that something was wrong but could not identify what it was that was sticking up. He decided to share his feelings with his wife. When Sergey told his wife about his unknowing feelings, she supported him and reassured him. She said it was just stress or fatigue and he shouldn't pay attention to it. Her words brought him comfort, and Sergey felt better. Arriving at work at 8 a.m., Sergey met with Dimitri. Seeing this stretch, he smiled. Immediately, his thoughts shifted, and he forgot about the unknown anxiety. Together, they went to their workstations and began their duties. Sergey saw how Dimitri struggled to get through each task, and it pleased him. He felt proud of his apprentice and rejoiced at his success. Together, they checked the nets, monitored the water body, and even caught a few large fish. Night descended on the fishing camp, shrouding it in gloom and mystery. Sergey and Dimitri made their way around the area, lighting the way with powerful flashlights. The darkness was thick and impenetrable, only broken by the light of their flashlights. Sergey felt an unknown restlessness take hold of him again. He looked around as if expecting something unusual. This evening was filled with tension, and Sergey sensed with every step that something was wrong. Dimitri, oblivious to his mentor's anxiety, continued to look at the nets and make notes in his journal. Fear gripped Sergey and Dimitri when they heard the growling of a bear. Rushing forward, Sergey took the bear spray out of his pocket and ran toward the booth, Dimitri following him. Their hearts were racing and the tension in the air was palpable. The bear continued to express its threat by growling, coming closer and closer. Sergey and Dimitri rushed to the door of the booth, trying to get away from the danger. Sergey quickly opened the door. They ran inside, and excitement and fear mingled in their souls. The bear made a few more growling noises in due time before it started scratching at the door of the booth. The beast showed aggression, trying to reach in and get them. After a few tense minutes, the bear stopped scratching at the door and moved away. Sergey and Dimitri, trembling with tension and fright, pulled their cell phones out of their pockets and called their superiors. After recounting what had happened, they were instructed by their superiors to stay safely inside the booth until morning until help arrived. The bosses promised to send a rescue team to check the neighborhood to make sure the bear was no longer a threat. Sergey was experiencing an internal mental conflict. On the one hand, he felt obliged to protect the fishing camp and his apprentice, and on the other hand, he was afraid of the danger the bear might pose. But a desire burned inside him to make sure everything was all right, and he decided to check the area. Dima tried to stop Sergey, warning him against the risk of going outside at night when the bear was approaching. Confused and anxious, he said, "Uncle Sergey, maybe we shouldn't. We can wait until morning and the rescuers will come to help. It was not worth the risk." But Sergey was persistent and determined. He realized that this decision could be dangerous, but his inner sense of duty and responsibility compelled him to act. He smiled gratefully at Dimitri and said, "Thank you for caring, Dima, but I have to make sure everyone is okay. Be careful and stay inside. I'll be back as soon as I've checked everything out." When Sergey left the booth, his heart raced with fear as the bear suddenly jumped out from around the corner. He felt adrenaline flood his veins and instantly realized the danger of the situation. But his inner desire to make sure that Dimitri was in no danger took over. Sergey shouted, "Help!" hoping that someone would hear his cry and come to his aid. He tried to use a bear spray can to scare the animal away, but the bear was unresponsive. He realized that he had to act quickly to save himself and Dimitri. The bear clawed at Sergey's leg, and he felt the beast's sharp teeth piercing his skin. He felt a sharp pain, but he didn't give up. Sergey continued to struggle, throwing the canister at the bear in an attempt to disgust it. Dimitri, seeing the whole horrible picture, immediately realized that he had to act. He quickly pulled his phone out of his pocket and dialed the number of the police and ambulance, explaining the situation and asking them to send help as quickly as possible. The bear continued to attack Sergey, tearing his flesh with its sharp claws. Despite the pain and fear, Sergey continued to fight, not giving up in the face of the threat. The situation was critical. The bear clawed at Sergey's neck with its mighty jaws, pouring blood into this grim picture. Feeling a sharp burning sensation and sharp pain, Sergey realized that these could be his last moments. He tried to resist, but the bear's strength and fury was unstoppable. The bear began to shake Sergey like a toy bear, lifting him up on its mighty paws. Every jolt caused a new wave of pain in his wounded neck. Sergey fought for his life, but his strength was failing him in such a brutal fight with a ruthless predator. Dima, clutching the phone in his hand, stood motionless with his mouth open, staring at the horrifying scene before him. He felt his heart pounding with terror, unable to believe what was happening. He saw blood pouring down Sergey's neck and tears filled his eyes. The bear, showing its wild instincts, began to run away into the forest, dragging Sergey behind him. Dima could no longer see what was happening outside the window. His thoughts were clouded with fear and despair. He hoped that the ambulance would arrive as soon as possible to save Sergey from this nightmare. The ambulance and police were arriving at the fishing camp under the light of headlights and sirens. The parameters kicked in and the cars stopped at a booth from where the loud roar of the bear was coming from. Paramedics and police officers rushed to the booth to render aid to the injured man. When they approached the booth, they saw a horrifying picture. The bear stood nearby, displaying his strength and fury, and Sergey lay in front of him, covered in blood with visible wounds on his neck and leg. The bear grunted and growled, continuing to show aggression to the people around it. The police officers carefully approached with trauma weapons, ready to scare the bear away if necessary. The paramedics at this time began to give first aid to Sergey, covering the wounds and trying to stop the bleeding. Sergey was unconscious, but his heart was still beating. The bear, hearing the roar of the car's engine, decided to let Sergey go and quickly ran away into the forest. With his mighty leaps and growling sounds, he disappeared into the night darkness, leaving Sergey in the hands of rescuers. The police decided not to pursue the bear so as not to further enrage the beast. The paramedics worked hard trying to stop the bleeding and treat the victim. They bandaged the wounds using all available medical supplies. But the wounds inflicted by the bear were too serious and deep. Every second was precious, and the medics did everything they could to save Sergey's life. Despite their efforts, Sergey died on the spot. His heart stopped beating and the doctors were unable to bring him back to life. It was a tragic and sad end for a man who was so brave and dedicated to his work. A deep silence reigned near the booth. The bear disappeared into the night, leaving only traces of its rage and aggression. Dimitri stood next to the officers of the law, his eyes filled with tears. He lost his mentor, his friend, his teacher. Sergey was buried in a cemetery in the Smirnikovsky district. His death left a void in the hearts of those who knew and valued him. His strength, wisdom, and kindness will be remembered forever. This tragic story reminds us how important it is to be careful and vigilant in nature. Wild animals can be dangerous, and it is necessary to know how to behave properly in such situations. Sergey gave his life protecting his student in the fishing camp. His sacrifice will not be forgotten, and his spirit will live on in the hearts of those he helped and believed in. Guram moved to Canada with his family because his father found a good job there. His father was a construction worker and his mother worked as a cook. The move happened when Guram was 19 years old. He left his friends and his native country to start a new life in Canada. In the beginning, it was not easy for him to adapt to the new culture and language, but over time he found friends and started to study at the local college. Guram is grateful to his father for his decision to move to Canada because it opened new opportunities and prospects for his future. Guram started going to a hunting club after he met some guys in his new neighborhood who were hunting enthusiasts. He became interested in this type of activity and decided to try his hand at it. Gradually, he began participating in hunting trips with his new friends and found that it was becoming an exciting and interesting activity for him. When Guram shared his new hobby with his parents, they were a bit puzzled at first, as hunting was not something they were used to. However, they saw their son's interest and passion for this activity and gradually began to approve of his hobby. The person in charge of the circle was Kevin. Kevin was a very strict and demanding leader of the hunting circle. He always insisted on strict adherence to safety rules during hunting trips. Kevin demanded that all participants be careful and responsible to avoid any incidents and accidents. He also insisted that hunting should only be within the laws and regulations set by law. Kevin did not tolerate misconduct and always emphasized safety and ethical hunting. There were approximately 20 people in the circle who shared a common interest in hunting. All participants tried to maintain a friendly atmosphere and help each other in learning new skills. Kevin, as the leader of the circle, played an important role in managing the group and training the newcomers. His strictness and exacting nature helped maintain discipline and safety during training sessions. At one of the training sessions, Kevin announced that they would be having a hunting competition in a week. He said the top 5 students from the circle he will take with him on a week-long hunt. This will be a great opportunity for those who have worked really hard on their skills and are ready for a new challenge, he said with a smile. Kevin explained that they would be tested on various hunting skills and theoretical knowledge, and that it would be a real challenge for all participants. The next week, the long-awaited hunting competition that Kevin organized for the members of his club began. The competition was very intense and demanding. The participants were tested on various hunting skills such as shooting, following the prey, knowing the rules and laws of hunting. Guram performed excellently in all the challenges. His stamina, focus, and experience helped him get through every task. In the end, after the completion of all competitions, Guram took the second place, becoming one of the best participants of the club. Guram had a hard time convincing his parents to give him permission to go on a week-long hunting trip with Kevin. He assured them that Kevin would be with him and would do everything he could to ensure his safety during the trek. Guram expressed his dedication and willingness to be tested, convincing his parents that he really wanted and needed to participate in this unique experience. Gradually, after giving in to their son's passion and persuasiveness, his parents realized that hunting had become not just a hobby for Guram, but a real passion and part of his personality. Guram took his preparations for the week-long hunting trip with Kevin very seriously. He started packing all the necessary items on the list Kevin had given him. The next morning, Guram was enthusiastic and ready to go on a week-long hunting trip with Kevin. He got up early to have time to check all his gear and make sure he hadn't forgotten anything. He then kissed his mother, expressing his gratitude and his promise to stay safe during the hike. Guram then walked outside and saw Kevin's car pull up. He smiled happily and walked over to the car loaded with hunting gear. Kevin greeted Guram with a wide smile and gave him a handshake. "Get ready for an unforgettable adventure, Guram," Kevin said as he patrolled around the car. "We're going on a great hunt, and I'm sure you'll perform at your best. Remember, safety first." They set off into the forests of Quebec. The forests of Quebec can be dangerous due to various factors such as wild animals, uneven and difficult terrain, variable weather, and the potential for sudden situations. These forests can be home to various predatory animals such as bears, wolves, and bobcats that can pose a threat to humans, especially if they don't know how to behave properly if they encounter them. Ferocious bears are found in the wild and can attack if they feel threatened or if they are disturbed. That's why it's important to know how to behave in the event of a bear encounter, to avoid conflict and protect yourself. It is important to remember that a bear is a wild predator and you should not get too close to it. If you encounter a bear, it is important not to panic or make sudden movements. You should not approach a bear or try to feed it. It can be dangerous for both you and the animal. In the event of an encounter with a bear in the forests of Quebec, it is advisable to act calmly and without unnecessary movement. As soon as they arrived in the forests of Quebec, Guram and Kevin began to lay out their belongings. They chose a campsite by the river so they could have access to water. First, they set up the tent and laid out sleeping bags to provide a comfortable place to rest. They then began to place a fire to cook dinner and keep warm in the cold evening hours. The other 3 guys were doing other things. Guram helped Kevin with gathering wood for the fire and cooking dinner. He made sure that the fire was safe and did not pose a threat to the camp. They cooked hot canned food and enjoyed the nature around them. In the evening, they discussed the next day's hunting plan and discussed strategy. The next morning, Guram, Kevin, and 3 other guys went hunting. Just after leaving camp, they found fresh droppings, which Kevin immediately identified as bear tracks. At this point, Kevin ordered everyone to be as alert and cautious as possible, as an encounter with a bear could be dangerous. All the members of the circle tensely observed the surrounding area, gazing intently into the forest and listening to the sounds of nature. Guram felt his heart beating faster as they were in an unpredictable situation where any mistake could become dangerous. Kevin led the group along the bear's tracks, trying to figure out where it was going and how much time had passed since it had passed that spot. He paid attention to changes in the forest vegetation, damage on trees, and other signs of a wild animal in the vicinity. As the bear tracks progressed along the trail, Kevin began to sense that they were getting closer and closer to the animal. He quietly ordered everyone to freeze and be completely silent to avoid attracting the bear's attention. Guram had mixed feelings of fear and excitement, realizing that they might encounter a wild animal very soon. After a long walk along the bear's tracks, they suddenly heard crunching branches and heavy breathing nearby. Kevin immediately stopped the group and slowly but firmly raised his rifle in preparation for a possible bear encounter. Everyone in the circle tensely looked in the direction of the noise, ready for action. Suddenly, a huge brown bear came out from behind the bushes, emitting a growl and moving in their direction. Guram felt his heart drop at his heels, but an arrow of adrenaline ran through his entire body, giving him strength and determination. Kevin instantly took control of the situation, ordering everyone to stand still and not move. The bear stopped a few meters away from the group, examining them closely. Kevin slowly lowered his hand, signaling to the bear that they were no threat to him. The bear stood on its hind legs and began to growl menacingly, showing its threatening posture. His fur was ruffled, and many scars could be seen on his body, showing that he was an experienced and strong predator. One of the scars on its muzzle was missing even its right eye, making its appearance even more frightening. However, the bear did not attack the group, continuing to growl and show its dominance. Guram felt his every cell tense at this moment, ready for action. It seemed to him that time stood still, and all his attention was focused on the bear that stood in front of them. Kevin, remaining calm and in control of the situation, continuously looked at the bear and slowly raised his hand, showing his peaceful intent. His eyes sparkled with experience and determination, which put Guram and the rest of the contestants at ease. They knew that at this moment they should act with clarity and focus. Finally, the bear took one last look at the group, turned and slowly walked back deep into the forest, disappearing from sight. After the bear left, Kevin ordered everyone to return to camp immediately. He was shocked at the bear's aggressive behavior, as he had not seen anything like this in the last 10 years. Kevin knew that the safety of the group was a priority, and he needed to take precautions to avoid a possible encounter with the bear again. When they returned to camp, Kevin gathered all the participants together and gave them a detailed analysis of the incident that had occurred. He explained to them that the bear had shown aggression due to territorial instinct, and that they should be even more vigilant and cautious the next time they hunted. Kevin also reminded them of the importance of following rules and orders in such situations to avoid possible dangers. Guram was impressed with Kevin's professionalism and experience in managing the group in critical situations. He realized that without his knowledge and wisdom, the encounter with the bear could have ended much worse. Guram thanked his mentor for his determination and ability to keep his cool in difficult situations. After the bear incident, Guram and the other participants listened carefully to Kevin's recommendations and tried to learn lessons from the experience. They realized that there are always dangers in nature and that it is important to be prepared for any unforeseen situations. The morning after the bear incident, Guram, Kevin, and the rest of the circle decided to go hunting on a different route. They chose a safer and less risky route to avoid possible conflicts with wild animals. Kevin led the group with caution and determination, ensuring safety and strictly enforcing the rules of the hunt. As Guram and Kevin continued their conversation about the specifics of hunting in the forests of Quebec and planned their strategy for the day, they didn't notice their friends Louie, Phil, and Joni trailing behind. The boys acted like shadows, hiding behind trees and staying at a distance. Louis heard quiet rustling behind him and instantly turned around to realize what was going on. His heart hammered even harder when he saw a huge one-eyed bear leap out of the bushes. His fur was ruffled and he let out a menacing growl, reminding them of his wild nature. Joni, stunned and frightened, didn't even have time to react to the bear's appearance before it was already clawing at his neck with its sharp fangs. Blood splattered around, and Johnny started screaming in pain and terror. The rest of the guys started screaming as hard as they could, trying to get Kevin and Guram's attention. Louis was paralyzed with fear, but suddenly he remembered that he had a gun. He struggled to gather all his strength and raised his rifle and pointed it at the bear. His hands were trembling, but he knew he had to act quickly to save his friend. The bear, noticing the new threat, let go of Joni and turned on Louis. He let out a menacing growl and started moving towards him. Louis struggled to aim and fired at the bear, but the bullet only scratched its hide without doing any serious damage. Kevin, hearing the screams and the noise of a struggle, instantly realized that something terrible was happening. He quickly grabbed his rifle and rushed to the scene. Seeing the bear claw into Louis's legs and begin to toss him around, Kevin felt a wave of adrenaline and fear. It was clear to him that every second mattered, and he had to act quickly to save Louis. He rushed forward, aiming at the bear, which continued to attack Louis. But because the bear was tossing Louis around and moving very fast, Kevin couldn't be sure of the accuracy of his shot. He needed to find a moment when the bear was close enough and not moving too fast. The bear continued to attack Louis, who desperately tried to fight off the beast. He screamed in pain and fear, all his strength going into defending himself from the attack, but the bear was too strong and dangerous, and Louis was in a hopeless position. At this time, Kevin was still standing still, watching the situation closely. It was important for him to choose the right moment to shoot to do serious damage to the bear and save Louis. He concentrated, his hand firmly gripping the handle of his gun, his eyes staring straight at the bear. As the bear turned toward him, Kevin saw the moment and pulled the trigger. A shot rang through the forest, piercing the air and reaching its target. The bullet pierced the bear's hide, giving it a serious blow. The beast howled in pain and fright, but continued to attack. Kevin quickly reloaded the gun and fired again, hitting the bear in the paw. The bear jumped back, howled in pain, and disappeared into the forest. Kevin heard Louis' screams and instantly turned in his direction. He saw Louis holding his throat and screaming for help. At that moment, his heart clenched with horror as he realized that something terrible had happened to Joni. He instantly rushed to the scene, driven by the instinct of defense and the desire to save his friends. Kevin ran over to Louis, who was still holding onto Joni's throat. He was amazed at the horror and fear he saw on Louis' face. Joni was lying on the ground in a huge pool of blood, his eyes filled with despair and fear. Kevin realized that the moment of rescue was gone and his heart was breaking with pain and grief. Unable to bear the sight of his dying friend, Kevin fell to his knees beside Joni. He clenched his hands into fists, feeling tears spurting from his eyes. He screamed at the sky, cursing that horrible moment and his powerlessness to save Joni's life. He realized that in that moment there was nothing he could do to change what was happening. Everything around him was filled with moments of silent despair, tears, and pain. The wounds inflicted by the bear were too serious to leave Joni any chance of survival. Kevin felt his heart being torn apart by grief and defeat. "Help Louis!" shouted Kevin to the other two guys standing behind him. "He's injured. Help him with his concussion while I take care of Joni." The guys, hearing Kevin scream, instantly ran over to Louis and began administering first aid. They used bandages from the first aid kit to stop the bleeding and fix his wounds. Kevin saw them act quickly and decisively, and it gave him some relief in this tragic situation. He then returned his attention to Joni, who was still lying on the ground unmoving. Kevin knelt down beside him and took his hand, feeling a slight throbbing. Tears were streaming down his face and his heart was breaking with grief. He spoke soothing words to him even though he knew it wouldn't make a difference. The paramedics soon arrived on the scene and began treating Joni. They quickly carried him on a stretcher to the ambulance and headed to the nearest hospital. Kevin stared at the departing car, feeling helpless and torn inside. He spent the whole day and night waiting for news about Joni's condition. But unfortunately, Joni could not be saved. Joni and Louis' parents were in shock from the tragic accident in the woods. They were filled with grief and pain from the loss of their son and were deciding who to ultimately blame for this tragedy. They began to blame Kevin, who was the leader of the hunting circle and responsible for the safety of the participants. His parents blamed him for failing to prevent the bear attack on their son Joni, and that his vigilance and skills were not enough to manage the critical situation. They said that Kevin failed in his leadership duties and failed to ensure the safety of all the participants. They felt that he was not trustworthy or responsible for other people. Kevin, full of guilt and anguish at the loss of his friend, was taking all the blame and realizing that he couldn't save Joni. It was hard for him to realize that he was responsible for this tragedy, and he could not afford to let it go. In letters to the court, Joni and Louis' parents expressed deep pain and grief at the loss of their sons. They blamed Kevin for his lack of professionalism and vigilance that led to Joni's death. They claimed that Kevin failed to keep the circle members safe and failed to protect them from the bear attack. His parents talked about how Kevin should be held responsible for the tragedy and that he should be punished with dignity. They claimed that Lewis had been left with serious injuries because of the incident and that Kevin had failed to keep him safe. The parents called attention to the fact that Kevin should be barred from hunting and leading such circles in the future because he did not meet safety standards. Joni and Louie's parents also argued that Kevin should be punished by the court and jailed for his lack of action at the time of the bear attack. Kevin couldn't handle the pressure and accusations that fell on him from all sides after the tragic accident in the woods. His heart was torn apart by the loss of his friend Joni and Lewis's suffering. He felt full of guilt and powerlessness, realizing that he had failed to protect his friends. Under the onslaught of accusations and loss of meaning in his life, Kevin made the decision to take his own life. He left a letter to his parents and friends apologizing for his failures and admitting his guilt. He wrote that he couldn't handle the grief and responsibility of Joni's death and that he didn't deserve to live after such a tragedy. Kevin was found dead in the woods near the scene of the accident. His death came as a shock to all who knew him and further compounded the tragedy that day.